happened was they found the tomb of Philip in 2011 in Hierapolis. That's in Anatolia. They found the tomb there. So that gives some credence to the mission to Hierapolis that Philip, Bartholomew, Mariamene, John of Ephesus, and one more, who I can't remember. They went all over there to the place was called Ophisopolis before Hierapolis. Ophisopolis means the city of snakes. They worship snakes in this place, and they had a temple there full of snakes. And this is where this group of apostles I mentioned came to town. They were sent there specifically by James, according to the letter. And when they got there, the miracle was that they were able to convert the queen of that place, who was a Hebrew woman who had gone over there in the dispersion and married this king. She was very sick. And with her healing, her husband went crazy mad because he didn't see the Yahshua she saw. He just saw such a bright light that he couldn't stand it, and it aggravated him. So when his wife came over to this faith because of her healing, he decided to get the temple crowd there of the snakes and get them riled up and to take care of all these apostles, to kill them. They did horrible things to them. I won't mention here, but suffice it to say that the outcome was that Philip died. He was nailed to the door of the temple of the snakes, and he died there. And then it tells us where he was buried. But once he died, John comes along, and John is ready to command the whole temple to catch fire and everybody die in there. Because by this time, the antagonists were all drunk and wild, and they're all right in there in the temple. He wanted to set the place on fire, and then Yahshua speaks to him. Yahshua rebukes him. He said, remember the last time you wanted to bring it down on the Samaritans. This isn't for you to do. Vengeance is mine, saith Yahweh, etc., etc. And then what happens is Yahshua sinks the place. It sinks into the ground, bubbling into an underground well. So water comes up as that temple sinks. People in there are out in the water. They're beginning to drown, and there are snakes everywhere. Poisonous snakes in this hole with them. So what finally happens is that there's only one person that dies, and that's the king. He goes straight down underneath the temple, and there he stays. The rest of them, Yahshua saves. He sees that they are all caught up by the ropes that were used to tie up these apostles in the first place, and he saves the city, and then the city is converted through this. Now, it's only one little problem, and that is Philip dies there, and where he dies, his blood was spilled, and he tells the other apostles, Bartholomew for one that's there, he says, you see where my blood lies on the ground. I want you to bury me where the blood is, and I want you to plant a grapevine there. So this can be the first place to celebrate the Master's Supper after I'm gone, and the grapes come up. All right, well, you know he was nailed to the temple, so that gives you an idea where he was buried. The archaeologists and scientists that found the tomb couldn't find the bones. Now, they said, well, the bones must have been shipped off as relics to Constantinople sometime in the past. But the problem is, if they had given credence to the Acts of Philip, the Acts tell you exactly where the bones are. And had they read that a little farther, then they would have been able to find the bones exactly where they were buried. But let me say, I am not going to tell them. On July 27th, 2011, the day after the announcement of the discovery of the Philistine horned altar, Francesco D'Andrea, who had been excavating in the ancient city of Hierapolis for 32 years, announced the discovery of the tomb of the Apostle Philip. At this time, the grave hadn't been opened, but he's convinced it belonged to Philip. There's a church dedicated to St. Philip on Martyrs Hill in Hierapolis, but Philip's grave was never found there. But in June, D'Andrea unearthed another church 131 feet away. There they discovered a tomb. D'Andrea believes Philip's body was moved from St. Philip's Church on Martyrs Hill to this newly discovered church sometime in the 5th century. How in the world would he know that? Why does D'Andrea believe it's the tomb of the Apostle Philip? All of the evidence has not been released yet, but one reason is clearly that there is a tradition in the Acts of Philip that claims that Philip was crucified in Hierapolis. That's why an octagonal church is built in the city on the site called Martyrs Hill. This is the site on which the Apostle Philip was crucified by the Romans. That's not at all what the story said. He was not crucified by Romans. He was nailed up to the door of the temple of the snakes. Another reason is the discovery of a 6th century bronze bread stamp bearing an image of Philip standing on a staircase between two churches. The image reads Hagios Philippos, which means holy or Saint Philip. And here we go. While this may be the tomb of a person named Philip, and while it may even turn out to contain the bones of such an individual bearing that name, it's not at all certain that this is the tomb of Philip the Apostle. It may be the tomb of Philip the Evangelist. Well, let me tell you something here. They're both the same person. The earliest testimony comes from Papias, as recounted by Eusebius. While his works have been lost, Eusebius was familiar with them and records for us some of Papias' testimony. This is part of it. That Philip the Apostle dwelt in Hierapolis with his daughters has already been stated. But it must be noted here that Papias, their contemporary, says that he heard a wonderful tale from the daughters of Philip, for he relates that in his time one rose from the dead. And he tells another wonderful story about Eustace, surnamed Barsabas, that he drank a deadly poison and yet by the grace of the Lord suffered no harm. There are several other notices here from Polycrat and from Proclus that identifies the Apostle Philip as being in Hierapolis as well as the text source. But they can't see that the two Philips are the same. Why? Because church doctrine says they weren't. I have a long text on St. Peter's tomb down there in Jerusalem. I might as well go ahead. I'm not going to read this, but if you want to know more about this, I can get it to you. It's really long. I'll tell you about something else down there that I saw. I was there a long time ago, but in my book called Jesus Within Judaism, there was an article in there about the 10 most significant archaeological finds regarding Christianity or Jewish Christianity. And one of those was in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. And my tour group went to the church there in Capernaum. Well, we know that Yeshua taught there. It had been built up, the synagogue, I shouldn't say church, the synagogue. And it had been built up by the Greeks later, so there's some columns there, but it was pretty well messed up. And they built another one, a church right beside it, something called St. Peter of the Sea or something like that in Capernaum. And I was standing at that synagogue and looking over, and I saw, like I had a couple other things, a very picture out of Jesus Within Judaism of this area that they described as Peter's house. Peter's house. Well, I couldn't get in there because the Dominican Catholics had hastily bought that place once this was found out, and they were putting, of course, a church over top of it, so you couldn't get in there to see. But I have pictures in the basement of this house. You might remember Peter's mother-in-law in Capernaum? No, or was she in Nazareth? She might have been in Nazareth. Peter's house there, the basement is full of graffiti. Early Jewish Christian graffiti, like names of the apostles, and pictures of fishes, pictures of Jonah and the whale, which were indicative of the first century. Speaking of St. Peter's house. So there we find that. And in Capernaum, the synagogue that Yeshua preached in, and the sea, and the new church there where we had communion. I have a little article on literacy. Back in 600 BC. We're going to 600 BC. That's 600 years before Messiah. This is a time when Israel was in the dispersion, but Judah was not yet. Yeah, that's the piece I haven't found yet, but I will get there, Bob. Scholars have long debated how much of the Hebrew Bible was composed before the destruction of Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah in 586 BC. Scholars agree that key biblical texts were written starting in the 7th century BC. The exact date of the compilation of these books remain in question. But a new Tel Aviv University study published today suggests that widespread literacy was required for the massive undertaking and provides empirical evidence of that literacy in the final days of the kingdom of Judah. Profusion of literate individuals in Judah may have set the stage for the compilation of biblical works that constitute the basis of Judahite history and theology, such as the early versions of the books of Deuteronomy, the 2nd Kings, according to researchers. Why, of course they were literate in Judea. There's a heated discussion regarding the timing of the composition of a critical mass of biblical text. What they're saying is that around 600 BC, that some people in Judea put some of these cursory books of the Bible together, a little bit of the Tanakh and a little bit of the historical books. To answer this, one must ask a broader question. What were the literacy rates in Judah at the end of the First Temple period? And what were the literacy rates later on under Persian rule? Using cutting-edge computerized image processing and machine learning tools, the TAU team analyzed 16 inscriptions on earth and an excavation in the remote fort of Arad and deduced that the texts had been written by at least 6 authors. The content of the inscription disclosed that reading and writing abilities existed throughout the military chain of command from the highest echelon all the way down to the deputy quartermaster of the fort. Quote, "We designed an algorithm to distinguish between different authors, then composed a statistical mechanism to assess our findings. Through probability analysis, we eliminated the likelihood that the texts were written by a single author." They can do that, but they can't see with their eyes plainly an ossuary with Simon Bar Jonah, an ossuary with Alexander the Cyrene, the Jesus family tomb. No, none of those things relate to the Bible. But this does. When we build an algorithm in a computer and run some text through, that is okay. Just think the army was literate. 600 BC. Well, what do you know? We found indirect evidence of the existence of an educational infrastructure which could have enabled the composition of biblical texts. Literacy existed at all levels of the administrative, military, and priestly systems of Judah. Reading and writing were not limited to a tiny elite. Following the fall of Judah, there was a large gap in production of Hebrew inscriptions until the 2nd century BC, the next period with evidence for widespread literacy. This reduces the odds for a compilation of substantial biblical literature in Jerusalem between 586 BC and 200 BC. Oh, you're not telling us anything we don't already know. Hate to be so cynical, but I guess we don't dare use common sense. I guess what we need to do is fix us on a computer algorithm and throw in some data. Next, go to the picture of the helmet. This is in Greece, in Pelas, or Archantiko Pelas, northern Greece. 37 ancient tombs dating back to the Iron Age in a cemetery near the ancient Macedonian capital of Pelas. Discoveries at the site include a bronze helmet with a gold mouthplate, with weapons and jewelry, and in the tomb of a warrior from the 6th century BC. We're back at about the same time. A total of 37 new tombs were discovered during excavation work this year, adding to more than 1,000 tombs since work began in 2000, researchers said. The tombs date from 650 to 280 BC. They contain iron swords, spears, daggers, vases, pottery, jewelry made of gold, silver, and iron. According to the researchers, the excavated area only represents 5% of the total site. Oh, they found lots and lots of tombs there. You just wonder what kind of text they're finding in the tombs. And look at that helmet. It looks like an early 20th century football helmet. Remember when Babe Ruth used to play football? Yeah, he probably wore a helmet like this, sort of wake you up. But look at this thing he had over his mouth. Mouth guard? Well, that thing's gold. That's gold. It's all right. The only house of Yahweh ever found where? In Baalbek? Oh, please answer that question. Tel Arad. Well, there's another one, in Egypt. At least two more in Egypt. All right. Mass execution in Greece. Huh? Oh, and I certainly will. This is another group of mass graves. They discovered 2 mass graves near the Greek capital containing the skeletons of 80 men who may have been followers of an ancient would-be tyrant, Chilon of Athens. Look at something unusual about these skeletons. Their hands are tied. This gives me the thought that these guys were buried alive. Well, either that or a defeated army. They put, let's see, what did they say? Regional Archaeological Services Director Stella Krisuklaki laid out the theory Thursday as she unveiled the findings at the Central Archaeological Council, the custodians of Greece's ancient heritage. Given the high importance of these discoveries, the council is launching further investigation.
Now, how did you like your Schruumkoff, Brother Snyder?
Brother Schruumkoff, it was Schroom delicious. Would you mind filling that cup again?
Oh, and did I mention that you can get your own bag of Schroom coffee at veroyahad.org? We've got a couple more, too. We've got Sting Coffee, and we have Cafe Moringa. Schroom Coffee Red Reishi, Sting Coffee Guarana, Cafe Moringa, of course, we've got fresh moringa leaves in there. But when you take your last couple sips, you're going to get a big dose of that. You're going to know it in a second when you get all kinds of energy and vitamins. And then you're going to say, Brother Schruumkoff, send me another bag.
Help us and help yourself. Get your Schroom coffee at essenecoffee.com. Save one of them for me.
Two small vases discovered among the skeletons have allowed archaeologists to date the graves from between 675 and 650 BC, a period of great political turmoil in the region. The skeletons were found lined up, some on their backs and others on their stomach. A total of 36 had their hands bound with iron. They were discovered during excavations at the ancient cemetery on Athens' seaside outskirts. Archaeologists found, get this, the teeth of the men to be in good condition. That's good, indicating that they brushed twice a day. This boosts the theory that they could have been followers of Chilon, a nobleman whose failed coup in the 7th century BC is detailed in the accounts of ancient historians Herodotus and Thucydides. Chilon, an Olympic champ, sought to rule Athens as a tyrant, but Athenians opposed the coup attempt, and he and his supporters were forced to seek refuge in the Acropolis, the citadel that is today the Greek capital's biggest tourist attraction. They finally and eventually surrendering after winning guarantees that their lives would be spared. Maybe they weren't. But Megacles, of the powerful Alcmaeonid class, had the men massacred, an act condemned as sacrilegious by the city authority. Historians say this dramatic chapter in the story of Athens showed the aristocracy's resistance to the political transformation that would eventually herald in 2,500 years of Athenian democracy. That's cool. It's horrible, though. I looked that over, and they say that it's usual for the mouth to come open in death, but these guys look like they're screaming. Here's Baalbek, the sacrifice there. Look at the hands here. Okay, so we're talking now human sacrifice and child sacrifice to the worship of Baal at the Baalbek temple. Oh, here's a little of that. When we turn to mythology to help understand these calamities, we find some puzzling insight. The Greek writer Homer told how the mighty sky god Zeus cast thunderbolts on the earth and tumbled the walls of Troy with his earthquake. The inhabitants of Baalbek feared Baal. This god was their name for Zeus, also known as Jupiter and Ammon. Humans were sacrificed in an attempt to pacify him and prevent huge destructive earthquakes. They believed by their actions they could control and manipulate the gods. Did you hear about the fellow here in Florida last week that got hit square on the top of the head by lightning and lived? Barely. In the mysterious tablets of Ugarit, discovered by Claude Schaefer, Baal is the god of rain, thunder, and extraordinary bolts of light. The worship of Baal extended in this region to the Jews, Canaanites, and the Phoenicians, but Herodotus informs us the god was also known under many other names, such as Jupiter of the Romans, Zeus of the Greeks, Mazda of the Persians, and Ammon of the Egyptians. Priests instructed the people that the bright sky god Baal was responsible for droughts, plagues, earthquakes, and other calamities. People were often worked up into great frenzies at the prospects of displeasing Baal. In times of great turbulence, human sacrifices, particularly children, were made to this father of the gods. When I was in college, I read an essay written by a Roman citizen about how the gods influenced his life. And I never forgot it, but I've never been able to find it again, because every step he took, he had to think about the gods, whether he was pleasing the gods or displeasing them. And everything that went wrong in his life, it was because he had displeased the gods, and everything that went right, it was because they were favorable to him. And he talked about the entire Roman culture being just that scared of their gods because they were perfidious. The gods would do whatever they wanted at any time, and they just blame everything on the gods. You see. King Ahab was one of the most notoriously wicked kings of the Bible. Under the influence of his wife, Ahab built altars to Baal. In the Old Testament, we read of King Heels, rebuilding of King Heels, never heard of him, rebuilding of Jericho, wherein he sacrificed his firstborn son, Aviram, his youngest son, and his youngest son, Segub. This is an explicit reference to what are called foundational sacrifices. Common enough in the Canaan of biblical times, these rituals sacrificed humans, typically children, to the patron god of the city. The bodies of these victims were placed under the foundation or in the walls of the structure, just like John Wayne Gacy did. Okay, it goes on to talk about the horrible, gross sacrifice of people. I'm going to read a little of this to you. Special ceremonies during extreme crisis saw up to 200 children of the most affluent and powerful families slain and tossed into the burning pyre. During the political crisis of 310, some 500 were killed. On a moonlit night, the body was placed on the arms of an effigy of Baal made of brass. The priest lit fires that heated the effigies from its lower part. The victims were placed on the burning hot outstretched hand. As they were burned alive, they vehemently cried out, so they are still alive in the hands of Baal. The priest beat a drum, sounded flutes, lyres, and tambourines. Sound just like Mount Carmel, doesn't it? This drowned out the cries of the anguished parent. The father could not hear the voice of his son, and his heart might not be moved. All right, so they're putting the children in the arms of Baal. Reminds me a story of Caligula, the emperor of Rome, bringing his child out who was sick and putting it in the hands of Jupiter, in the temple of Jupiter. He didn't do it because he was sick. He did it to show the people, make them think that Jupiter himself had birthed the child. Of course, when Caligula was assassinated, the next thing they did was to kill his wife and to kill his child. So Jupiter didn't reign too well on that child. The remains were collected and placed in special small urns. They were then buried in the funerary Acropolis. Recent excavations discovered a great number of these urns, proving the accusation of child sacrifice true. The area covered by the funerary Acropolis was probably over an acre and a half by the 4th century BC, with 9 different levels of burial. Sounds like the Vero dump, doesn't it? Archaeologists have discovered evidence of child sacrifice also in Sardinia and Sicily. The ritual of burning was called the act of laughing, perhaps because when the flames are consuming the body, the limbs contract and the open mouth seemed almost to be laughing. Causing a child to pass through the fire was a standard euphemism for child sacrifice in the ancient world. In the high places were sacrificial cults that had grown up in the countryside. Since human sacrifice was the most horrendous of the religious perversions that occurred at these shrines, the term high places became a synonym for shrines to Baal engaged in human sacrifice. Baalbek was just such a place. Oh, there's more. Allow me, the writer says, to turn your attention to Nimrod, as Baal was also known. It's important that you know that Nimrod incorporated into his worship system the grisly practice of human sacrifice, then cannibalism. Our authority Hislop, I think that's Alexander Hislop of the two Babylons, he says, the priests of Nimrod or Baal were necessarily required to eat the human sacrifice, and thus it has come to pass that Kana Baal, Kana meaning priest, and Baal referring to Baal, is the established word cannibal. Kana Baal. Kana Baal. Cannibal in our own tongue, or a devourer of human flesh. The Roman scholar Diodorus relates that in their midst stood a bronze statue of Baal, its hands extended over a bronze brazier, the flames of which engulfed the child. When the flames fall upon the body, the limbs contract, and the open mouth seems to be laughing until the contracted body slips quietly into the brazier. Thus it is said that the grin is known as sardonic laughter, since they die laughing. Such was the fear that Baal and his lightning and earthquakes inspired in the city of Baalbek. By these means they sought to pacify that sky god. A couple of skeletons just kind of lounging around. Got my papers out of order. You can see there's a bunch of them. St. Peter, Jerusalem tomb. I wanted to find more about St. Peter not being the first pope. I want to find the Abba. I read about the Abba tomb quite a bit. Peter not the first pope. This ancient mass graves. Bellbox Temple. Well, this is easy enough taken care of. I'm going to just look it up here. Yes, there's a lot of stuff on this, but it's brand new, I think. Yeah, here's what I looked at before. We go up to the top of the illustration, and the four top ones have to do with King Abba, whoever that is. Here's an article written by a prominent scholar and historian. This is just April 11th. Of Second Temple period Judaism revisits, I can hardly read this, the tantalizing issues surrounding, I gotta make this bigger, the almost forgotten Abba cave tomb in Jerusalem. Lost and almost forgotten over the years amidst the flurry of news about other archaeological discoveries in and around Jerusalem. Man, there have been a lot of so much coming out of the ground. When are the books of Yahshua coming out of the ground? I would guess that they've come out already, and they're hiding away in the Vatican Library. The Abba Cave is arguably still on the list of cold cases of ancient tomb discoveries of the last century. But recently, Tabor, professor of ancient Judaism and early Christianity, the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, has penned a few reminders about this in his popular blog. I mean, a few reminders. I mean, it was probably 12 pages. The story begins with a discovery in 1970 when construction workers stumbled across an ancient tomb while building a private home in the Givat HaMivtar community in East Jerusalem. Interestingly, the tomb was not far from another famous tomb excavated in 68, also at Givat HaMivtar. They contained the first century bones of a crucified named Yohanan, or Yochanan. You might remember Yochanan. I did a teaching on this on here about a year and a half ago. Yochanan was found to have a nail in his foot, a great big spike. He had been crucified, but when they pounded the spike into the stake, it hit a bowl in there. Call them bowls, not hole, not a knot in there. And the spike turned and made at the end of that spike a hook. So when they finally got take him down, the only way they could take him down was to cut that piece out of the stake. So they have found this foot of the crucified man, Yochanan, in 1970. And when I went over there, I tried hard to see this foot, but I couldn't find it. So that's the story of Yochanan. Within the tomb was an ornately engraved ossuary, a limestone bone box used by first century Jews to collect and store the bones of deceased family members 1 year after death. Okay, so they left them laying on tables inside the tomb for 1 year. There would be up to a 70-day visitation. From 7 to 70 days, depending on what the family chose. Now you might understand why they would take 100 pounds of aloes into a grave, because what you did was you went to visit the deceased laying on the table, and you went there, and the Greek term was refrigerium. You did a refrigerium. Guess we get the word refrigerator from it, I guess. You take your food in there, you sit at the table where the deceased is rotting away, and you have a meal with the deceased on various occasions. So he could be in there, or she, laying on the table for up to 70 days. That's more than 2 months. Before they shut the tomb up and let him desiccate there, a year up, they take the bones and put them in the ossuary. On the tomb wall above this ossuary was an inscription in Aramaic. I am Abba, son of Eleazar the priest. I am Abba, the oppressed, the persecuted, born in Jerusalem and exiled in Babylon, who brought back Mattathiah, son of Judah, and buried him in the cave that I purchased. Interesting that it says born in Jerusalem and exiled in Babylon. That would take us back long years, 500 years. The initial investigation and interpretation of the tomb and its contents in the 70s led scholars to suggest that the tomb contained the remains of Antigonus II Mattathias, the last king of the Hasmonean dynasty, the ruling Jewish family that was established when the Maccabean revolt successfully threw off the yoke of the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. Antigonus II, however, came to a horrific end when he was captured and executed by crucifixion and beheading at the hands of Mark Antony in 37 BC. You've heard of the Battle of... I know that you know what it is, Jason. The Battle of Atrium, where Mark Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. They're always fighting against the Herods and the people in Israel. And this happened to Antigonus after Jerusalem was captured and the throne seized by King Herod, or Herod the Great. The circumstances and evidence of the tomb and its contents were telling. The contents of Abba's inscription on the wall, an elaborately decorated ossuary fit for a king, bones of a person 25 years old, including those of the hand with embedded nails and a cut jaw and cuts on the second vertebrae, indications of crucifixion and beheading, all osteological evidence, that means bones, that would be consistent with what is known about Mattathias, and the lack of an inscription on the ossuary identifying the remains, coupled with the finding of that ossuary was hidden in a niche under the floor of a cave, circumstances that could be consistent with someone securing the vanquished king's remains during a time when the Hasmoneans were under persecution after the fall of Mattathias. But later other scholars disputed the interpretation. Most notably was the analysis of bones by Patricia Smith of Hebrew University. Smith concluded that the cut jaw belonged to an elderly woman and that the nails found in the ossuary had not passed through the bones. The case was closed for years until 2 experts began to re-examine it. The first was Yoel Elitzer, a Hebrew University historian and scholar of Semitic languages, who in 2013 published a study that identified Abba, the name of the person who inscribed the message on the wall above the ossuary of the tomb, as the head of a family, according to Josephus, who were supporters of the Hasmoneans, that's the Maccabees, even after Herod had ascended the throne. The Battle of Actium, I'm going to look back. I know some got this. Actium, got it. That's before I looked. The second expert was Israel Hershkovitz, Tel Aviv University anthropologist, who re-examined the nails that were found within the ossuary using an electron microscope and found that the nails did indeed penetrate the bones of the hand, driven through the palm, and bent or hooked, presumably to keep the arms and hands secured on the cross beam. However, says Hershkovitz, Smith's earlier examination and conclusions regarding the gender of the bones was unconvincing, as the bones she was examined would not securely identify the sex of the person. This is aside from the fact that if she was correct, then the Romans crucified a woman, something that Hershkovitz maintained the Romans almost never did. Okay, there's a inscription up here on the wall. That must be our Abba inscription, and I'm looking at that lettering, and that looks to me like some form of Paleo-Hebrew. How about you? No, I don't know anything about Hebrew. And here it is in color. I think I've got the color picture there. Well, that would be quite readable for someone that knew the alphabet. And there's a picture of the ossuary in situ. That means just right where it lies within the tomb. A couple of candles there. It's a beautiful ossuary, beautifully carved. On the other side, we see a completely different carving pattern, and these ossuaries were seldom carved unless the person that was in there was quite rich. Tabor, for his part, favors a reconsideration of the original interpretation of the Abatum discovery. As he relates in his blog, he suggests the argument for the remains of a crucified and beheaded male in the tomb is still convincing. Taking all the facts together, he says, the hypothesis that this individual was a Hasmonean royal priest king Antigonus, writes Tabor, turns out to be a live option. Well, of course. Now we're going to have to go look him up in Josephus, the last of the Maccabees. The second generation of the Maccabees were rotten to the core. Only the first generation were people that were concerned about the disposition of Yahweh. Let me see. What do we have here? Allison Gary's not asleep. How'd you know Lee was over here sleeping? Well, the custom was, especially for rulers, the Romans would take them back to Rome, have a parade, a triumph parade. Then they would walk whoever they had down to a certain flat spot that they used for executions, and the people would be standing around, and they would take that potentate, that foreign potentate, like the guy Simon of Giora out of Jerusalem in 70 AD. They got him alive, and they took him. He walked into that place, and then they would kill him as slowly as possible for the entertainment of the people. They would literally hack him from limb to limb. A horse? What upper incisors? Oh, next to the human? I gotta see that. Where is that picture? Really? Oh, my. That, a horse or a donkey? Looks like it's got an alien head on it. Maybe it's one of the Nephilim. Show that to one of your conspiracy theorists. That head on there looks like a Nephilim head to me. Maybe it's a Nephilim donkey. What do you think, Lee? Isn't that something? They took the animals and buried them alive. Could be. Yet this is a mass grave. There's just gobs of people in it. Well, so much for the Abba inscription. That Antigonus, he's a very prominent person in Josephus, not in the war, but in the antiquities. All right. Well, now there are other caves. My time's not long up. But I had done before Cave 7 at Qumran, where they found the Gospels, and the Cave of Letters, the Cave of Horrors, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. That's really cool, especially when they turn off the light.
We found the Cave of Letters on Google.
Did you find it?
Yeah, we found it months ago. So
that's right. Cave of Letters. That had letters from Bar Kokhba in them, the Messiah of 132 AD, and they had letters in there from a woman named Babitha that told all her business. This is a young businesswoman who had been married twice. The second wife was somebody. All her papers were in there, and the Babitha files are very, very interesting to see how individuated a woman. This was a Jewish woman that came from Arabia. How, what's the word I want? Independent they could be. Yeah, oh yeah. My dad drove off the top of Ruby Falls when he was 12. Been to Ruby Falls. I think she's pulling our leg. He was 12 years old. What was he driving, a helicopter? Well, Mammoth Cave, I went there when I was a kid. Yeah, and I'll never forget when they turned that light off. Rush is not kidding, and she gets upset if you tell me, how did he do that? How did he live? He dove off the top of Ruby Falls. Oh, I thought it's drove off. Well, you say those two ossuaries are different? Well, the label in the article says they're the same, but I believe you. They did look different to me. And his father said he could. All right. I don't want you doing that, Rosh. Please don't do that. We want to preserve you alive. Okay, well, that's it for today. That's all that I have, but I want to show you all this paper. Look at it. Gobs and gobs of paper. I breezed through all of this, but I'm going to enjoy reading it because I'm going to just see again. Is that for me? What is this? Schruumkoff? It's grape soda. Here, I was all set for a cup of steak. Thank you, Joshua. Joshua's calling me a bother. Thank you all, and I guess I may see you again Tuesday. I hope this is worthwhile for you. I always think these caves and archaeological stuff very interesting. Let's find some more. Thank you, Bob, and I'll see you later now. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbat.
What care I I who makes the laws of a nation. Let those who will take care of its rights and wrongs. What care I who cares for the world's affairs, as long as I can sing its popular songs? Let me sing a funny song with crazy words that roll along. And if my song can start you laughing, I'm happy, happy. Let me sing a sad refrain of broken hearts who loved in vain. And if my song can start you crying, I'm happy. Let me croon a low-down blues that lift you out of your seat. If my blues can reach your shoes and start you tapping your feet, I'm happy. Let me sing of Dixie's charms, of cotton fields and Mammy's arms. And if my song can make you homesick, I'm happy. Let me sing a funny song with crazy words that roll along. If my song can start you laughing, I'm happy, oh, I'm happy. Let me sing a sad refrain of broken hearts who loved in vain. And if my song can start you crying, I'm happy. Let me croon a low-down blues that lifts you out of your seat. If my song can reach your shoes and start you tapping your feet, I'm happy. I want to sing of Dixie's charms, of cotton fields and Mammy's arms. And if my song can make you homesick, I'm happy.